Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 627. Releasing August 30 on digital is Hinckley, a documentary that delves into the life of John Hinckley, who in 1981 attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. An unsparing profile on a man whose shocking act of political violence still resonates today. Hinckley also asks whether redemption is possible for a man who committed one of America's most infamous crimes. And joining me now is the director of Hinckley, Mr. Neil McGregor. Neil, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on the show, Matt.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And we were just talking off air just now about how I was just looking at John Hinckley's YouTube page. For people who don't know about John Hickley has a YouTube page where he kind of like puts original songs up, cover songs as well. He's like he was and is still an aspiring kind of folk musician. The Beatles were a big influence for him, as you see in the movie. For yourself, Neil, this is where pretty much the story how you kind of got in touch with John, right? You were looking for music for Growing Happiness, which is a documentary you did beforehand. You wanted a folky kind of tune. You come across this cover of a Bob Dylan song by none other than John Hinckley itself, which in it's just saying that has so many surreal kind of applications to it, right? So you see this, you see the cover. How does that kind of come into your mind? You know what, this is kind of could be an interesting kind of subject to delve into, especially in regards as a documentary feature.
Look, the pure fascination of how does someone go from being obsessed with the movie Taxi Driver to stalking the actress Jodie Foster and going and shooting the president of the United States to try and press Jodie Foster in a mental health issue battle in an unwell state of mind, and then go through 35 years at a mental institution, come out the other side to try and decouple from their past and become a musician and an artist. That story is just a phenomenal thing to even consider. And for me, it was how does someone go from that and come out as this? And that human exploration of the dark side of the American dream, of him trying to emulate his idols of John Lennon and Bob Dylan. It just seemed like such a fascinating story, very much so of sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction is very much John Hinckley's life. And for me, that was the fascination of the attraction of the film. And I reached out to John Hinckley and sort of said, look, I'd love to make this documentary about you and your life, about what you're doing now, but also about your past. And being an objective outsider as an Australian telling a very American story, I think it allowed that to be removed from subjectivity, especially with politics and things that are very much entwined with the story. It just had to be a story that just needed to be told. And I feel very humbled to step into the shoes of someone like that to be able to share it with audiences and at a very timely time.
I think that's a really important thing we should put out there. This isn't like a political polemic or anything like that. This is just a look at this guy's life, the act that he did in the assassination, everything that led up to that, everything afterwards. It's really interesting how you said like as coming from as an outsider, an Australian filmmaker, looking into talking to this man. Such an infamous moment in the history of America, especially in the last last century or so. When you get in touch with him, do you know if any other people also try to get in touch with him as well? Because I'm sure when he was released, like he did 35 years psychiatric care, he was released. He lives in Virginia. I'm sure a lot of people would have tried to get in touch with him and try to make a movie like that. If that is, was that the case? And if so, is it the fact that were an outsider and he knows that you're not going to kind of approach this and then start in any type of, with any type of what's the word I'm looking for? Any type of ulterior motive or anything like that? Does that help in your case to say to him, look, I just want to tell your story, and that's all I'm really kind of interested in.
Look, he was chatting with other people, and many other people had approached him for trying to do a documentary to share his story. A lot of journalists are often reaching out to him to do interviews because of things that he did in 1981. The time when I asked him, he had been chatting with someone else about the possibility, but something that allowed myself to perhaps be that sort of bit of difference is just being a complete outsider. And my creative vision for the project was to be able to just share things as they were and as they are, rather than focusing just on the past, which obviously people want to kind of know and talk about it. Well, what separates you or I or anyone from going and shooting at the president of the United States? So it definitely did help, that creative approach to it. And obviously that created other challenges for us. We're here in Australia, and only a small team to tell us a very American story created other challenges around how to actually tell that story, how to logistically make that happen, how to finance it. So it was a unique challenge for us to be able to do that. And I think for him, it allowed a level of rapport and trust that we built up over time. So I still chat with John regularly over maybe a 6-month period as we were researching and developing the film and the creative style and the tone of it. It really was lots of conversations for John with me, obviously with the time difference between Australia and Virginia, like here in Queensland and Virginia, to really just talk and how we're going to do it. He got paid $1 to tell his story, so we knew it was very true and honest. We had full editorial control that we controlled here in Australia, and that was something that we just shared and approached in that very authentic style.
When you go to Virginia with your crew, and I think you were there for a couple of weeks or so to do shooting over there and interviews. When you're actually in the room with John, because by then you the Zoom calls, I imagine, and phone calls and what have you. When you're actually in the room with him and you're talking to him, what was it like being in his presence, and what was it like just having him being so transparent? Because that's what comes across when I watched the documentary. There's a transparency to him. He's like, this is what I did. I know what I did was wrong. This is what happened. This is where I am now. It doesn't seem to be any type of sugarcoating any of this stuff. It's very much he's opened up everything that he has and is letting us know. He's letting us into this process. I'm really curious about that kind of a dynamic of interviewer and subject matter being in a room with him.
Look, when you become you tell a story and you have a documentary, you step in the lives of people. You sharing that story. So you got to do that in the most authentic sort of way. As you noted, he obviously did some very monstrous things and impacted people's lives in very complex, profound ways that they dealt with their whole life, and in some cases still do. So it was important to make sure that those sorts of things weren't glossed over, that those were given the attention and respect out of the fact that they were victims of John Hinckley's actions during his mental state back in 1981. For us to be in the presence with John Hickley, it was, you always sort of step into this moment of being very hyper aware that cameras are around, and then there's a moment where you suddenly, they forget the cameras are there. They let their guard down. They sort of are already there. And we had already spent months and months of rapport building and conversation and open communication and setting, mental health barriers to make sure that he felt comfortable sharing, difficult challenges of his life and events that he was involved in. And it's just a very sort of symbiotic kind of process. And what surprised me perhaps the most was how much of it that he shared, but also just how much he was open to being vulnerable. And as you said, he owns these actions for what he did. He doesn't excuse them and obviously shows a lot of remorse for them, but he's just a very ordinary guy, very kind of normal, that the person he is now is obviously not the kind of person that he was then when he shot 4 people, but you can't tell the present without the past. And I was always very mindful that he still did do these things. And, it's certainly what I think is an intrigue of the story to share some of that in that way. And just to being around someone just so very casual and hanging out in his living room and, watching him make music covers and, he would open up about a whole bunch of different things. I mean, that is what a good documentary should do. It should earn that sort of trust and share that story for what it is for the audience.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. For me, a big thing about the story is, well, there's two big factors, and I think one of them relates more to an American audience, and the other one relates to a whole kind of global audience. The American audience part of it, especially, is the whole gun control, gun culture kind of aspect. I don't know what people can do about that legislatively, personally, what have you, because it's so ingrained within American culture. I don't know if that's going to change. One thing that can change, though, definitely is mental health and approaches towards that. And I think when we see the story of John and so many other people that have been involved in sort of like maybe assassination attempts or maybe spree killings or whatever, there's always the aspect that comes back to, which is when it comes down to the core of the person themselves, an aspect of mental illness also always comes into play. And it seems to be the same kind of issues: isolation, lack of kind of like social dynamics, falling into a wrong kind of like pigeonhole. Something that I know a little bit about. I got a son, he's autistic and has ADHD. We're always on top making sure that he's seeing psychologists and medications. And here in Australia, we're actually got a real good thing going here because we have the NDIS and that helps and such. But back in when John was growing up, that kind of stuff was very taboo. No one ever talked about that stuff. And I think it's something that's really people need to realize. But still today, in some aspects, like look what happened just with the Trump assassination. Supposedly the person who did that also isolated, no social dynamics, mental health stuff, and it's still such a pressing issue that needs to change. And I think it's something that's something that really comes to the fore with me when I watch it, though, that many of the root problems that people aren't looking at are still not addressed, or at least still not attempted to be fixed. And I think that something that you also took away from this as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, with the Thomas Crook's Trump assassination attempt, we don't know the full circumstances of that. There are certainly telltale signs that there was something of that mental health space. We don't know. John Hinckley was the last time that sort of event had happened. And this film definitely provides some insights, perhaps into some of these unresolved issues, and just goes to show how easily those sorts of things can spiral
Yeah.
with devastating consequences. And Matt, obviously that's a very personal and passionate thing for yourself, with mental health and ADHD and things like that, like with your son. That is something that I've going into this documentary was an important thing to look at the mental health of it. If you see someone and they've got a bandage on, you can physically see that there's some damage there. Mental health, we don't have that. And it's not so much the person that they can't even recognize themselves, but the person across from them also can't see that. And the more we kind of talk about it, the more conversations we have around mental health helps us find a pathway forward. John Hinckley in the late 1970s, it was not as widely understood as it is now, and still there's much to go currently for how we can better understanding and resolve mental health issues. In the late 70s, it was not widely understood. It wasn't really diagnosed in the right way. There were so many failings of systems throughout that allowed these kinds of events to spiral. He actually had psychologists who and psychiatric help that he sought help and actually seeked help to try and resolve these issues he knew he had. But their responses was, here's some more Valium, or oh, you're just a messed up kid, just, need a sort of a kick up the pants kind of thing, as was sort of that style of the time back then. Had those kinds of events happened differently, had that knowledge of understanding allowed that to not happen, or put, cross checks in place to be able to steer a different course to try and correct it, the events of 1981 might not have happened the way that they did. And something that this documentary, I hope that does too, is it sparks that conversation. I think a good documentary should, share that kind of knowledge, inform it. It should ask a lot of these questions. And I think a more important time than ever to ask them. Obviously, gun control is part of that. Mental health is a very important stigma to have a conversation around. And if people watch this documentary and have a conversation with something after the credits roll, that's a profound impact that creates the betterment towards understanding and also working towards changing the stigma around mental health.
a big thing in the whole John Hickley story, and also that's talked about in the film, is the whole taxi driver Jodie Foster aspect of it, obsession that he had with both those things, the movie and the star of the movie, in Jodie Foster. It's really interesting conversation that often comes up in regards to the relationship between art and the public. What inspires what reflects on what. I'm a big heavy metal fan, and as you can see, my posters behind me, a big horror fan as well. But I'm also a big heavy metal fan, and I remember I was listening to this interview with the lead singer of Slayer. And if I don't know if you know Slayer, but they're very, very extreme kind of
Depends.
metal, all that kind of stuff, right? And they were talking to him about um the lyrical content in his stuff, and he said, we're not preaching anything, but all we're doing is just showing the stark reflections of society. We're taking what's out there and we're just showing it back to you in a form of art. And I imagine, and I guess, in many ways, Taxi Driver was that as well for Martin Scorsese. With so many things going on. Then the Mark Chapman murder, like, happened the year before. Vietnam, everything. The Vietnam vets coming back home, all that kind of stuff. But then you have someone like a John Hinckley, and he watches that stuff, and then he kind of absorbs that kind of stuff, and he takes on the persona of the characters in the film. Where do you kind of stand on a lot of that stuff in regards to whether a film is a reflection, or can it also be something that can inspire? And I'm not saying in any way that film should be banned or censored or anything like that. And I'm not saying in any way that, people shouldn't, certain people shouldn't watch certain films, but maybe, just maybe, if he hadn't seen Taxi Driver, would John Hinckley still be John Hinckley? Or do you think that maybe that was a kind of like something that kind of spurred him along down the path of that we know he went down?
Look, cinema is a very, very powerful tool. It's can change how we do many things. And John Hinckley seeing Taxi Driver in the late 70s is an example of that. And I think that's credit to Martin Scorsese making such a powerful masterpiece of a film to be able
Yeah.
to change someone's life in a profound way. He and Matt, something you kind of noted there quickly was that the art and things of the time are really just like with the Slayer lyrics, like it is really just presenting it back to you. It's there being inspired of the time and circumstances and the emotion and feelings of a moment in time. And I think that's really, Taxi Driver has those kinds of elements. And the power of art is that people gravitate towards it. And I think on the flip side of it, you can fall in love with something, or through moments of grief. And art has this way of inspiring and creating comfort towards it. And it can be music, it can be cinema, it can be a piece of art, it can be a poetry, it can be a song. Had John Hinckley not seen Taxi Driver, he also read Catcher in the Rye, and Mark David Chapman was inspired by a similar kind of isolated character in that particular novel. And he may have found it there instead of Taxi Driver. And in some ways, it was both those sources that kind of spurred those events on. And I think that's kind of what something about the power of art is that it does encapsulate these things. And, in some ways, Hinckley, the time that it comes out now probably speaks to some of that too. We look at the time of what we got with the US election. We've got Thomas Cook's Trump incident more recently. It speaks to the now. It is the story of us, and John Hinckley's story is a profound one that raises the mirror up to society. And I think that's what a lot of good film does, a lot of good art, a lot of good music. That is what's so great about art in all its forms. But obviously there is the danger of we don't know what people will do with it. And we can't be controlling of those sorts of things. You got to be responsible of how you approach it and what it is. But then also that ties into the mental health of what people might do with it.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. Speaking of obsession with film, you as a filmmaker, me as a consumer of films and write about them and such, we love filming. We love talking about film and watching them and such. Do you have a film in particular that you ever been really obsessed with, like deep dive, kind of just want to know everything about it, watched it a million times? For me, it's The Exorcist. Probably not good for my health, but still, it's
Fantastic
one
film.
of it's my favorite movie of all time. And whenever there's a documentary about it, or an interview, or a new cut, or a whatever, I'm watching it, I'm owning it, I'm buying it, what have you. What about for yourself? Do you have a movie that you've ever been obsessed with?
Oh, that's like, asking to choose favorites for kids and pets, isn't it? Look, there's probably a few films that kind of come along. One of them's probably on the background there, which is Jaws, and Heat
Hmm.
for a little bit of time was a Michael Mann film, which had a similar sort of moment of, yeah, probably the other films that kind of come to mind is the Alien and Aliens, the Ridley Scott and James Cameron's ones. I did a film thesis on the Alien quadrilogy, which is Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection. Those films are not so much obsessed, but really kind of looking into the depth of what makes those films what they are. And I think for any good film, it's not always just about what they're about, but what they're really, really about. What's in the subtext of it. Taxi Driver obviously is a similar example of that too, where it looks at what's on the surface value of an isolated character and disconnected from society. But in the subtext of that is that broken American dream. That's something that we explore in Hinckley. It's obviously about a man who tried to shoot the president and tries to have a music career on the surface, but in the subtext of it, and what the film is really about is that broken American dream that really is in a challenging sort of state. I think that's what is so powerful about cinema. My like yourself is always fascinated about it, and wanting to know every little part of it. It is always interesting when you make a film. Sometimes the illusion of it's like a magician where they have the illusion of a film. Sometimes the more you know, the more you wish you
Hmm.
ruin some of the illusion of it. But then sometimes that is part of the charm of really kind of deep diving and distilling what makes a film so powerful. And The Exorcist is a good example of that too, where it is such a brilliant masterpiece at the time that it came out, and still is now, and holds the test of time.
Sometimes it's kind of like meeting Oz behind the curtain, right? But even then, that comes with little blessings as well. So
That is exactly it. It is that knowing how it's kind of there, it gets you to appreciate and respect it on a different level. And I think that also makes a reaffirmation as to why that film is so good, or why that piece of art even is what it is, or why does that make you feel that way. That's ultimately what that fascination obsession can be.
um, another you were talking before about the American dream, or in this case of John Hinckley, the broken American dream. Um, the other thing that's very quintessentially American is redemption, forgiveness. Now, whether that could be attained to John from certain members of the public, I know it's up to them, really. I know that I read an article from, and they were interviewing the biographer of Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan said that he forgave John Hinckley, and he actually wanted to meet him as well. But a lot of people said probably not a good idea right now. He's still going through, all that kind of stuff, and he might be kind of confirming some of the things that he had, and maybe like giving him a little bit of what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? He needs
It's like
distance from yeah.
notoriety, yeah.
Exactly, and it's probably not a good idea to give that to him right now. But Reagan was actually inspired by Pope John Paul II, who, like, I think it was like 2 months after Reagan's assassination, Pope John Paul II got shot as well, and then he forgave his attacker, and so Reagan was like inspired by that and wanted to do the same thing. Now that John Hinckley he's done his time, some 35 years, he's taking care of his mental health. He's been deemed as not to be a danger to anyone or any out there, and he's trying to put forward a kind of like his ambition again, or his dream to try to become like a musician, which is, who knows, maybe if he went to a different path, maybe it was something he could have achieved all the way back then. Do you think that when this movie comes out August 30, that people will be ready to embrace that side of him and move forward, or do you think that the notoriety of the act of the assassination was so big then maybe it'll just be too much of a hurdle for people to jump over in regards to giving not a green light, but maybe like an amber light to move forward with John Hinckley trying to pursue this thing and finding some fame through there.
The minds of many will be difficult to change. What this documentary does uncover is it puts you into the minds and shoes of someone that has done these things, and gives understanding as to what kind of unwell state of mind that he did do. And there's things in here that no one else has seen before. It's a story that hasn't been told before. John Hinckley is the only living person that's shot a US president, and he's telling this story. Whether that is something for people to be able to forgive him for those actions. The best thing about a film is it's about posing these questions to ask, not as the filmmaker to answer them for the audience. That, I think, speaks to the power of what film should do. People will make their own mind about it. Whether he's redeemed himself, he's certainly challenged. There's some significant challenges and insurmountable obstacles of mental health that he has battled, and in some ways won. But you can't excuse those actions for his past. He still did that violent act, still impacted the lives of many. But do people deserve a second chance? That is for people to watch the film Hinckley and decide.
And that film does release August 30 worldwide on digital. I really highly recommend people watch Hinckley. It's incredibly fascinating movie. It's a fascinating portrait of this man who, I think just watching his story and just watching how what it was for him growing up and everything, all the stuff that he did, and then where he is now, it's just incredibly engrossing watch, and especially coming from himself, like he's front and center on the screen telling his story. And also, I gotta say, the production value in it is fantastic. The music as well. I know you had people from the Silence team, from Martin Scorsese's Silence team, doing the score for that. The names I have here: Ken and Catherine Kluge. They did the music.
Catherine Kluge, phenomenal score.
Phenomenal score. Also, the archival stuff, the tape of he taped himself talking to Jodie Foster and recorded. That's incredible as well. I think the stuff that you put here together is the whole kind of like the film as a comprehensive documentary is fascinating to watch, and I really urge everyone out there to watch it August 30 when it does come out. And Neil McGregor, thank you for your time, and also thank you for the movie. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and watch your film.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to chat. And yeah, as you said, August 30 on Hinckley.movie comes out. And yeah, absolutely love for people to watch it. And thank you very much for taking the time to say the kind comments. And it's always a pleasure to chat with someone who loves film as much as I do.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.